The coffee had gone cold 20 minutes ago, but I kept it pressed against my lips, watching. Through the glass conference room walls, Mr. Blackwood was performing his usual charm offensive on the external auditors, the same smile he'd worn when declaring me intellectually insufficient for the senior assistant role. What he didn't know was that I'd handpicked this audit firm. And today, that smile would cost him everything. "Cordelia, fetch the quarterly reconciliations," Serafina commanded without looking up from her phone. Auburn hair cascading like silk, designer heels that cost more than my car payment. She'd stolen my promotion with nothing but good genetics and a laugh that made executives forget their wives. Perfect. I needed her, exactly, this overconfident. Because Serafina had one fatal flaw. She'd never once questioned why her assistant had a master's in forensic accounting from Northwestern. I handed her the files with practiced deference. Section 12 has some interesting anomalies you might want to review. Her manicured fingers flipped pages she couldn't read, mathematical concepts dancing beyond her comprehension like foreign hieroglyphs. She'd never questioned why I worked late every night for 3 months, never wondered what I was really preparing. If she had, she might have noticed I wasn't just organizing files, I was documenting every single one of Mr. Blackwood's shortcuts. But there was something else she didn't know. Something that made my revenge even sweeter. The previous week, I discovered Serafina's secret. She was sleeping with Mr. Blackwood. The hotel receipts and his expense reports, the matching jewelry purchases on company credit cards, the late-night strategy sessions that never produced any strategies. She'd literally slept her way into my job. Before we dive deeper, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments, what would you do if beauty was valued more than brains? Mrs. Ravencroft entered like a silver-haired hurricane. The lead auditor possessed the kind of reputation that made CFOs update their resumes, 24 years of experience turning corporate lies inside out. I'd specifically requested her firm after discovering her specialty, exposing incompetent leadership hiding behind pretty faces. What I hadn't expected was recognizing her immediately. She'd been my professor at Northwestern, the one who taught me that forensic accounting was warfare disguised as mathematics. She opened the first file, and I saw her pupils dilate slightly. The trap was springing, but then she looked at me with a flicker of recognition. "Cordelia Martinez," she said quietly. "Top of your class, if I recall correctly. What brings you to filing work?" "These reconciliation reports contain substantial gaps," Mrs. Ravencroft announced louder, her voice cutting through the conference room's artificial calm. Mr. Blackwood's practiced confidence flickered, a micro-expression I'd learned to read during months of studying his every tell. But the real show was about to begin when Serafina tried to explain numbers she'd never understood. "They should be, Mr. Blackwood personally approved." Serafina's voice cracked like thin ice. The $89,000 discrepancy I'd embedded 6 weeks ago glowed on her screen like a neon confession. She'd signed off on it without reading, just like she signed off on everything. Her fingers flew across the keyboard in growing panic, hunting for documents that would expose her complete mathematical illiteracy. Here's where my months of preparation paid off. I'd made copies of every email where Serafina asked me to just handle the number stuff, while she focused on client relations. Every delegation of her actual responsibilities, documented and ready. But I'd also found something else, encrypted messages between her and Mr. Blackwood discussing their affair, including her demands for the promotion in exchange for continued discretion. "Allow me to assist," I offered, gliding to her workstation. My fingers danced across keys I knew by heart, pulling up the correct files while everyone witnessed her catastrophic fumble. Mr. Blackwood watched me navigate systems he claimed were beyond my intellectual capacity, his exact words, recorded on my phone during that humiliating meeting 6 months ago. But Mrs. Ravencroft was sharper than I'd expected. Her platinum pen scratched ominous notes as she asked, "Cordelia, you seem remarkably familiar with these complex financial systems. What's your educational background?" The room went dead silent. Mr. Blackwood's face drained of color as he realized what was coming. "Master's in forensic accounting from Northwestern, specialization in corporate fraud detection," I replied calmly. 5 years at PricewaterhouseCoopers before joining here as a filing assistant. Seraphina's mouth fell open. Mrs. Ravencroft's eyebrow arched with predatory interest. And yet you're not in a senior financial role because… Mr. Blackwood felt I lacked the proper executive presence. I let the words hang in the air like smoke from a fired gun. The morning unfolded like surgical clockwork, but with delicious complications I hadn't anticipated. Mrs. Ravencroft didn't just find the errors I'd planted, she discovered real ones. Genuine corruption I'd missed because I'd been too focused on Seraphina's incompetence to notice Mr. Blackwood's actual crimes. "This Pemberton Holdings contract," Mrs. Ravencroft said, her voice deadly quiet. "$300,000 in payments to a company that doesn't exist. The Delaware address is a UPS store." Mr. Blackwood's Italian leather shoes squeaked against marble as he shifted nervously. "There must be some administrative error." "No error." I pulled up the banking records I'd been secretly copying for months. The payments went to an account registered to Patricia Blackwood. "Your wife, I believe." The explosion was immediate. Seraphina gasped, finally understanding she'd been signing off on embezzlement. But then her face went white for a different reason. She was staring at her phone, where a text message had just appeared. "Patricia knows about us. Handle it. R." Mrs. Ravencroft's pen moved with surgical precision, documenting not just incompetence, but actual criminal activity. Mr. Blackwood's face cycled through fascinating emotions, confusion morphing into rage, rage dissolving into panic. But I wasn't done. "There's more. The Kingston Medical contract? Another shell company. Payments go to Kingston Holdings, which is owned by…" I paused for dramatic effect. "Seraphina Kingston, our current senior assistant." The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. "What?" I never, but her protests died as bank records appeared on screen. Someone had been depositing company funds into her personal account for months. Mr. Blackwood had set her up as his fall guy. The beautiful assistant wasn't just incompetent, she was being framed. And I was starting to realize this went deeper than office politics. "I can explain," Mr. Blackwood started, but Mrs. Ravencroft cut him off with a look that could freeze hellfire. "Save it for the FBI," she said, reaching for her phone. But before she could dial, the conference room door burst open. Patricia Blackwood stood there in a designer suit, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits. "Nobody's calling anyone," she announced. "At least not until we discuss the situation civilly." The room erupted into chaos. Seraphina was crying, finally understanding she'd been used as both eye candy and scapegoat. Mr. Blackwood was shouting about lawyers and jurisdiction. And I sat quietly, realizing my neat little revenge plot had accidentally uncovered actual federal crimes. But Patricia wasn't finished. "You see, I've been aware of my husband's indiscretions for quite some time, including his little arrangement with Miss Kingston here." Seraphina flinched, as if slapped. What I wasn't aware of was the extent of his financial creativity. Mrs. Ravencroft made her call while security guards appeared at the door. I'd arranged that too, though originally just for dramatic effect. Now they had a real purpose. "Nobody leaves until FBI Financial Crimes Division arrives," she announced. Mr. Blackwood lunged toward his computer, probably to delete evidence, but I'd already logged into the system remotely and locked him out. "I changed all the passwords 3 months ago," I said sweetly. "Executive privilege and all that." His face went through another fascinating transformation as he realized the quiet woman in the corner hadn't just been plotting his professional downfall, she'd been building a federal case. But Patricia had one more surprise. "Actually, I'm the one who called the FBI," she said calmly. "About 6 months ago. You see, I've been documenting Richard's crimes for divorce proceedings. I needed evidence of fraud to protect my assets." The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. Patricia Blackwood wasn't a victim, she was a co-conspirator who decided to flip. The shell companies, the fake contracts, the offshore accounts, she'd helped create them, then decided to destroy her husband when she discovered his affair. "You planned this entire thing," Mr. Blackwood whispered, his voice barely audible above Seraphina's sobbing. "Actually, I plan to embarrass you professionally. The criminal charges are just a bonus." I pulled up another file on the main screen. Want to see what else I found while organizing your files? The next revelation made Mrs. Ravencroft drop her pen. Blackwood Industries has been claiming tax deductions for charitable donations to the Blackwood Foundation, which spent 90% of its money on your family's personal expenses? Mr. Blackwood's knees actually buckled. Tax fraud, embezzlement, charity fraud. The charges were stacking up like cordwood. But I still had more cards to play. Serafina, I said gently, you need to know something. Those bank deposits in your name? They were never meant for you. I clicked to another screen showing deleted emails I'd recovered weeks ago. Messages to his lawyer discussing how to frame his assistant if the embezzlement was discovered. How her obvious incompetence would make her a perfect scapegoat. How no one would believe someone so beautiful could be smart enough for complex financial crimes. He was going to throw you under the bus, I explained as she read the messages with growing horror. When the heat got too intense, you were supposed to be the mastermind who seduced him into signing documents he didn't understand. The betrayal cut deeper than any professional humiliation. Serafina had genuinely believed she was just signing administrative paperwork while focusing on client relations. She trusted him completely, never realizing she was being positioned as the perfect fall guy. But then Patricia dropped another bomb. The affair wasn't accidental, darling, she told Serafina. Richard specifically targeted you because you fit the profile for a scapegoat. Beautiful, mathematically illiterate, desperate for advancement. You were chosen. Serafina's face crumpled as the full scope of her manipulation became clear. She hadn't seduced her way into the job. She'd been recruited for it. Why are you helping me? She asked through tears. Because incompetence isn't a crime. Fraud is. I turned to Mr. Blackwood, who was frantically texting someone on his phone. Who are you calling? Your lawyer? Your wife? Or maybe your partner in the Cayman Islands operation? His phone clattered to the floor. Mrs. Ravencroft's eyebrows shot up. Cayman Islands? Oh, yes. The really interesting money went offshore. I pulled up the final files, the ones that had taken me months to decode. Shell companies within shell companies, routing money through 3 different tax havens before landing in accounts controlled by Blackwood family members. But Patricia wasn't shocked by this revelation. She was nodding approvingly. Very thorough, Cordelia. You found the same trails I've been following for months. The FBI arrived within an hour, white-collar crime unit, led by Agent Sarah Chen. She took one look at the evidence spread across the conference table and whistled low. This is going to make someone's career. Mr. Blackwood tried one last desperate gambit. Cordelia orchestrated all of this. She had access to everything she could have. Agent Chen cut him off with a laugh. Sir, we've been investigating Blackwood Industries for 8 months. Your evidence just saved us another year of work. She turned to me with something approaching admiration. How long have you been documenting these crimes? From day one. But I needed concrete evidence and witness testimony. I gestured towards Serafina, who had stopped crying and started taking notes. She can testify that Mr. Blackwood handled all major financial decisions personally, kept her deliberately ignorant of actual numbers, and used her as a signature stamp for documents she couldn't understand. But Agent Chen had more surprises. We've also been monitoring communications between Blackwood Industries and several other companies in your sector. This appears to be part of a larger conspiracy involving bid rigging and market manipulation. The scope kept expanding. What had started as office politics was becoming a multi-company federal investigation. Mr. Blackwood wasn't just a petty embezzler. He was part of a criminal network that had been manipulating contracts worth millions. The Kingston medical contract, that's in Serafina's name? Agent Chen continued. Kingston Medical is owned by Richard Pemberton, who also owns Pemberton Holdings. They've been artificially inflating medical supply costs across 6 states while splitting the profits with company executives. Serafina looked genuinely shocked. I thought Kingston Medical was just another vendor. Richard seemed so professional during our meetings. Oh, he's professional, Agent Chen said grimly. Professionally criminal. We've been trying to prove the connection between him and corrupt executives for 2 years. I felt a chill of realization. How long has this investigation been going on? Since before you were hired. We were hoping someone inside Blackwood Industries would eventually come forward with evidence. Agent Chen paused meaningfully. We had no idea someone was already building a case from the inside. The room went quiet as everyone processed the implications. I hadn't just stumbled into a federal investigation. I'd been unknowingly working parallel to one. My revenge plot had accidentally become the missing piece in a major conspiracy case. But there was one more twist coming. Agent Chen pulled out a folder I hadn't seen before. Cordelia, we need to discuss your background check. Your previous employment at PricewaterhouseCoopers, there's a gap in your resume. My stomach dropped. This was the part of my past I'd hoped would stay buried. I spent 6 months consulting for the Justice Department's Corporate Fraud Task Force, I admitted. Undercover work, helping build cases against white-collar criminals. The room erupted again. Mrs. Ravencroft started laughing, actually laughing. You're telling me Blackwood hired a federal consultant to be his filing clerk? Former consultant, I corrected. I left that life behind after a case went wrong. A CEO figured out my real identity and tried to have me killed. I decided I wanted a quiet office job where I could use my skills without risking my life. Mr. Blackwood's face had gone gray. You're federal law enforcement? Was. Now I'm just a very overqualified filing clerk who happens to be excellent at spotting financial crimes. I smiled sweetly. The quiet life was getting boring anyway. But Patricia had been watching this exchange with growing interest. Agent Chen, she said suddenly, I think you should know that Cordelia isn't the only one with an interesting background. All eyes turned to her. What do you mean? Agent Chen asked. Well, it's curious that she happened to choose our company for her quiet office job, don't you think? Especially since her former supervisor at the Justice Department specifically recommended Blackwood Industries as a target for investigation. The air went out of the room. Agent Chen's expression shifted from confusion to suspicion. Is that true, Cordelia? I felt trapped. The truth was complicated, and explaining it would reveal just how deep my deception went. It's partially true. Explain. My former supervisor, Agent Williams, did suggest I might find Blackwood Industries interesting, but he didn't order me to investigate. I chose to take the job because I needed work and because... I hesitated. Because what? Agent Chen pressed. Because Richard Blackwood had been flagged in a previous investigation I worked on. The case that went wrong, where my cover was blown. He was peripherally involved. I wanted to know how deep his connections went. The revelation sent shockwaves through the room. My revenge plot hadn't been spontaneous. It had been a continuation of federal investigation that had gone cold 3 years ago. Mr. Blackwood was staring at me with something approaching terror. You've been hunting me for 3 years. Not hunting. Watching. Waiting for you to make a mistake big enough to matter. I turned to Agent Chen. The original case involved defense contractors artificially inflating costs for military medical supplies. Blackwood Industries was a subcontractor, but we could never prove criminal intent. Agent Chen was putting pieces together rapidly. The Kingston medical contracts. Military medical supplies? Exactly. Same network, same methods, just expanded to civilian healthcare. I pulled up another set of files. They've been overcharging hospitals and insurance companies using the same shell company structure they perfected on defense contracts. Patricia was nodding again. That's why I finally decided to cooperate with the FBI. When I realized Richard wasn't just stealing from our company, he was stealing from cancer patients and wounded veterans. The moral dimension added weight to everyone's decision-making. This wasn't just white-collar crime anymore, it was theft from people's medical care. Serafina, who had been quiet during these revelations, suddenly spoke up. The charity events. All those medical charity galas we attended. He was using them for networking, wasn't he? Very good, I replied. He was identifying which hospitals had the biggest budgets and the least oversight. Then Kingston Medical would submit inflated bids for their supplies. Agent Chen was grinning now. How would you feel about coming back? We could use someone with your particular combination of skills and motivation. Before I could answer, Mrs. Ravencroft interrupted. Actually, I'd like to make a competing offer. Ravencroft Auditing could use a partner with federal experience. Someone who understands how to build criminal cases, not just audit reports. But the biggest surprise came from an unexpected source. Serafina, who had been quietly taking notes throughout the entire revelation, looked up with determination I'd never seen before. I want to help, she said firmly. Not just as a witness. I want to learn how to do what you do. How to see through the lies and catch the criminals. Agent Chun looked intrigued. You do realize this would mean completely changing your career path? No more client dinners and company parties. Good, Serafina replied with surprising venom. I'm tired of being the pretty face that distracts people while men steal millions behind my back. I want to be the person who stops them. Patricia smiled approvingly. I'd like to fund that education. Consider it my contribution to justice. The irony was perfect. Mr. Blackwood had chosen Serafina for her looks and replaced me for my brains, never realizing that underestimating people creates enemies, not assets. His beautiful assistant wanted to become a fraud investigator, his overlooked filing clerk was about to become a federal consultant again, and his wife was financing both transformations out of spite. But Agent Chen had one final revelation. There's something else you should all know. This investigation has uncovered similar schemes at 17 other companies. We're looking at a nationwide conspiracy involving over $200 million in fraudulent medical supply contracts. The scope was staggering. What had started as my petty revenge against one sexist CEO had helped expose a criminal network that was literally stealing from sick people across the country. Mr. Blackwood finally broke. I want to make a deal, he said quietly. What kind of deal? Agent Chen asked. Full cooperation. I'll give you everything, names, bank accounts, communication records, meeting locations. Everything. He looked around the room desperately. But I want protection. If these people find out I'm cooperating. Agent Chen nodded grimly. We can discuss witness protection. But first, we need to know exactly how deep this goes. Over the next 4 hours, Mr. Blackwood laid out a criminal conspiracy that spanned 12 states and involved executives from Fortune 500 companies, government contractors, and medical supply manufacturers. The scope was so vast that Agent Chen called in additional teams from multiple FBI field offices. Serafina proved surprisingly valuable during this process. Her client relations work had involved attending dozens of industry events where she'd met many of the conspirators. What she'd thought were innocent social interactions were actually criminal networking sessions. Richard introduced me to all these people as his strategic planning assistant, she explained. I thought I was just being friendly at parties. I didn't realize I was witnessing criminal conspiracy meetings. Her testimony would be crucial for proving the connections between different companies and individuals in the network. By evening, the FBI had enough evidence to begin coordinating arrests across multiple states. The conspiracy involved artificial inflation of medical supply costs that had ultimately stolen hundreds of millions from insurance companies, hospitals, and government healthcare programs. 3 months later, I sat in a new office with senior special consultant on my business cards and a direct line to the FBI's white-collar crime division. The Blackwood case had become the largest healthcare fraud prosecution in federal history. Mr. Blackwood had been sentenced to 18 years federal prison after pleading guilty to conspiracy, embezzlement, tax fraud, charity fraud, and healthcare fraud. The total amount stolen exceeded $200 million. Serafina had enrolled in a forensic accounting program and was working as my research assistant while she studied. She turned out to have excellent instincts for spotting deception, probably from years of being lied to without realizing it. Patricia had funded a full scholarship for her studies and hired her as a consultant for her new nonprofit organization dedicated to exposing corporate fraud. Mrs. Ravencroft's final report had exposed corruption at 23 different companies, leading to 47 arrests and the recovery of over $200 million in stolen funds. The corporate conspiracy case became known as Operation Beautiful Mind, a reference to criminals who thought attractive assistants and charming personalities could hide their crimes forever. Patricia Blackwood had emerged as an unlikely hero, using her insider knowledge and financial resources to help prosecutors build airtight cases against her husband's co-conspirators. Her divorce settlement had been restructured to ensure she received enough assets to fund ongoing fraud investigations. But the sweetest revenge was simpler than all the federal cases and criminal convictions. Mr. Blackwood's final humiliation came when he learned that his intellectually insufficient filing clerk had become the lead consultant on the task force investigating corporate fraud in his industry, and his beautiful assistant was now studying to become a forensic accountant specifically to catch criminals like him. The lesson was crystal clear: underestimate competence at your own peril. Dismiss capability in favor of presentation, and eventually, reality will demand an accounting that no amount of charm can deflect. The overlooked woman had simply done what she'd always done, her job. But this time, her job was bringing down criminals who thought beauty and bluster could substitute for actual competence. And honestly, I couldn't have asked for better revenge than that. The investigation was still ongoing, with new arrests happening weekly as the conspiracy's full scope emerged. Each conviction felt like validation, not just of my professional skills, but of the principle that competence and integrity matter more than appearances and connections. And every time I saw my name in the federal prosecution reports, I remembered Mr. Blackwood's sneering words about my lack of executive presence. Turns out, the presence that really mattered was the kind that shows up in courtrooms and congressional hearings, not corporate boardrooms and charity galas. The beautiful irony was that I'd gotten everything I wanted without even planning for most of it. Not just professional recognition, but actual justice served with federal convictions and systemic change. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just being competent enough to notice when people are confessing their crimes to you daily, thinking you're too unimportant to matter. The overlooked woman had simply done what she'd always done, her job. But this time, everyone was finally paying attention. And if you liked this story, give it a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more shocking tales. Click the box on the left. Your next adventure is waiting.